In a world rife with noise and distraction, we are often driven by insatiable desires, reaching for more while neglecting the true needs of our inner selves. This season, we delve into the wisdom of Chapter 22 of Laozi's Tao Te Ching, which speaks of the adage, "Too much leads to indigestion." In this chapter, Laozi, with his unique and profound perspective, reveals to us two essential principles of life. With 6 concise yet profound phrases, he outlines the behavioral norms of a sage and further elucidates the unique qualities of such a person. This is not only a description of a sage, but also a guide for each of our philosophies of life. Let us turn to Chapter 22 of Laozi and savor the wisdom that has spanned millennia. To be bent is to be whole, to be crooked is to be straight, to be hollow is to be filled, to be worn out is to be renewed, to have little is to gain, to have much is to be confused. Therefore, the sage embraces the one as the model for the world. Not seeing himself, thus he is clear. Not asserting himself, thus he stands out. Not boasting, thus he has merit. Not being arrogant, thus he endures. Only by not contending does no one in the world contend with him. The ancient saying to be bent is to be whole. Is it not true? Indeed, it is the wholeness that returns. The meaning of this passage is not too complex. From the last sentence, we understand that the 6 preceding phrases are sayings from ancient people, even earlier than Laozi. His meaning, let's put it in plain terms. He says that by bending, one can be preserved. By being flexible, one can extend. By being low, one can be filled. By being old, one can be renewed. By taking little, one gains more. By taking much, one becomes confused. These 6 phrases have long existed. He is, in fact, seeing both the positive and negative, that everything must maintain balance. For example, by bending, one can be preserved. When strong winds blow, many trees are broken, but the willows of the south are not broken by the wind. They bend and respond softly to the wind. The grass on the ground is even less of a problem because it bends and thus is preserved. Looking again, only by being flexible can one extend. The most obvious example is when we were children raising silkworms or caterpillars in the forest. If they want to extend, they must first tuck in their bodies, bend, and then they can stretch. It's the same in society. We see people who have been wronged, but in the end, the truth is revealed, and they gain the affirmation and respect of others. Many such examples. Being low can fill, which is simple. Low places can be filled. When it rains, flat ground cannot hold water, but low holes can accumulate rainwater. Next, being old can be renewed. If something is new, it will not be replaced, but if it is old, it can be renewed. We once said a phrase from Laozi, which we understood as avoiding the old to make way for the new. Often seeing oneself as old allows for continuous renewal because human life exists in a process of time. Every day is a good day. Every day is different. Every moment is new. Then there are 2 phrases that I've personally come to appreciate, which could be summed up as less is more is confusion. I remember about 20 years ago when I was immersed in research and teaching at a university in Europe. My schedule was quite accommodating, with only a few hours dedicated to lectures each week, leaving the rest of the time completely free. Thus, I took the opportunity to visit an art museum every other half day. One time, I eagerly went to an art museum, fortunate enough to find 60 world-renowned paintings on display, but I only had 3 hours to spare. Let me pose this question. If you had to view 60 world-famous paintings in just 3 hours, how long could you actually stand in front of each one? A quick calculation reveals that you could only afford 3 minutes per painting. Honestly, in just 3 minutes, you wouldn't even have time to grasp the theme or identify the artist of a world-renowned painting before you had to move on. After rushing through 60 paintings in such a hurry, it becomes a mere cursory glance. By the time you exit, your mind is in chaos, with all the images blending together. On another occasion, I also used my afternoon time to go to an art museum. Of course, I asked a friend to drive me there. When I arrived, I realized it was bad. The museum was under renovation and only one painting was on display. I still had 3 hours, so I slowly and carefully looked at it. After a few hours, I understood the painting. In fact, we do many things the same way. If you calm down and listen to a piece of music, it's completely different from hastily listening to many people's performances. If you listen carefully to a piece of music, listen to it several times, and experience it more, you can understand its connotations. It's the same with a painting. I spent 3 hours looking at one painting, and then I never forgot it for the rest of my life. This is called less is more. More is confusion. More confuses you, less can be obtained. We can refer to this when studying Laozi. Although Laozi has only 81 chapters and more than 5,000 words, don't forget, 81 chapters are still quite a few, and 5,000 words are still considerable. Less is more is gained. Have you heard any sentence that is very few now? As long as you have a heart experience in one sentence, you have some tacit understanding with Laozi, and you can say that you have some ideas about Taoism. On the contrary, I know many people give Laozi to see a lot of reference books, because Laozi's version casually flip through hundreds of kinds. If you look at everyone's annotations, you will be confused in the end. Not to mention what Laozi himself said, just each annotation. Like a while ago, a friend reminded me that what I said about Laozi seemed to be different from the original text in my book of Laozi. I usually ignore one point. Usually I study, annotate, and translate classical materials like Chinese studies, and I usually revise them every 5 or 6 years. Why? Because I am still learning. In fact, every sentence Laozi said is controversial. How can I say that what I write now is a conclusion? Of course, it is the most reliable content I am responsible for writing so far. So the preliminary conclusion of Laozi is, the sage holds one as the world's affairs. Once it comes out, generally speaking, this one is the Tao, but you can also regard it as a whole. The sage grasps the whole, and he will not have any deviation. Then he even said 4 sentences that we are very familiar with. What is he talking about? He said not to be limited to what you see, so you can see clearly. Do not think you are right, so the truth is revealed. Do not boast about yourself, so you have credit. Do not rely on yourself, so you can lead. What is said here is not to be persistent. Like Buddhism likes to say, you have to give up my persistence, the persistence of the self. The 4 sentences Laozi said here are all aimed at this. Do not see yourself, do not think yourself, do not boast yourself, do not be arrogant. They are all their own selves. Of course, people cannot detach from their own lives. You always have your own views, your own ideas, your own statements and practices. But you must remember, do not inflate yourself. If you inflate yourself, everything is I think, how am I feel. In the end, others have no way to communicate with you. So it is said very clearly here, do not think that what you see is the only one that can be seen clearly. Do not think that you are right, so the truth is revealed, which means the truth is not necessarily what you see alone. Maybe you only see one side. Then you have to respect the other side that others see. The next important point is not to boast about yourself. You have credit. Do not rely on yourself. You can lead. People who are leaders must remember that they need the right time, place, and people. Then there is a sentence by Laozi that is often quoted, which is, because he does not compete with people, no one in the world competes with him. In fact, there are many examples of this. Some are more mischievous than him. For example, there is a person in the United States who came home one day and boasted to his wife, saying that he defeated 2 Olympic champions today. His wife said, "Is your sport so good? How is it possible to defeat the Olympic champions?" The husband said, "I competed in swimming with the tennis champion, and I competed in tennis with the swimming champion, and I won both. Did I not defeat 2 world champions?" This is a bit of self-mockery. But basically, if you do not compete with others, who will compete with you? I can now boast that I have never lost a go in this world. Why? Because I never play. That sounds very naughty, others will say. If you say this, then everyone can say it. Originally it can be said, why should I compete with others? I compete with myself, saying that I want to figure out a truth today, which book I want to read more today, how to do it. I want to do more good deeds, say more good words, that is my own requirements. Why should I compete with others? Even if you win when competing with others, do not forget, there are stronger people among the strong, and there are higher mountains than the high mountains. When I was young, I studied and met a professor who gave me a high score in one subject in the first semester and a low score in the second semester. I thought it was strange. I studied the same. Why the scores were so different? I asked a classmate to ask privately why Mr. Fu's grade in this subject is so poor. The professor said, I want him to know that there are people outside of people and the sky outside of the sky. To be honest, the professor did not have to do this. I already knew it. But he thought I was probably competitive, so he wanted to teach me a lesson. That lesson, I have remembered until now, knowing that you still have to learn from Laozi to get the inspiration of wisdom to solve the fundamental problems. So this paragraph mentioned later, back to what the ancients said before, bending can be preserved. How can these words be empty? It really allows people to be preserved and live a good life. So it is not easy for people to live a good life in the world. So in this episode, what have we learned? We learned that Laozi said a very good sentence. In addition to the previous, less is more is gained, there is another sentence that can be learned, which is preserve one. It is to hold a whole. Bending the body is of course the Tao, and there is no problem of much or little in the Tao. Bending to preserve, grievances and extension, low and full, are all relative. There is difficulty in being born and difficulty in being easy to achieve. As we said before, in other words, the sage knows that the judgments made by human beings are all relative, depending on how the standard is set. Once the standard is set, it can be divided into two ends. So the general judgment is the judgment of facts and the judgment of values. No matter what kind of judgment, you have to take into account both sides. You have to look at it from the whole, that is, this one. Looking from the whole, it will conform to the law of unity of opposites. In general, there is no problem. Don't just say that I must be less now, I must be more. We can think about what? Can we think about what Laozi said, less is more is gained, and think about whether we can study Chinese studies in terms of being exquisite in reading, not in quantity? You don't have to master every sentence. As long as you master one or two sentences, think it through, and then practice it. When practicing, you can improve the level of your life and improve the quality of your life. In that case, you will get a greater harvest. In this episode, we can think from this perspective.